Coming up on One Detroit, policing and community safety. We'll take a look at a program that supports both law enforcement and the community on emergency calls, and we'll hear about changes to policing in schools. Plus, Detroit's legacy news outlets make a move toward digital paywalls this week. Also, a conversation with our partners at Bridge Detroit about how Detroit suburbs are confronting their history of being sundown towns with racist policies, and a pandemic and the census, how the city of Detroit is stepping up efforts to make sure everyone gets counted by the new shortened deadline. I'm Stephen Henderson, and One Detroit is coming up.
Support for this program provided by W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, MASCO Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. MASCO, serving Michigan communities since 1929. The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. NISSAN Foundation, and viewers like you.
Welcome to One Detroit. I'm Stephen Henderson, sitting in for Christy this week. Coming up on the show, I talk policing and community safety with leaders who are creating partnerships and strategies that support the police and the people who interact with them. One Detroit contributor Nolan Finley talks with Detroit news editor and publisher Gary Miles about the digital paywall for content that is going up this week. And we'll hear from Bridge Detroit's Bryce Huffman about his report on Detroit suburbs dealing with their legacies as sundown towns. But we start with Census 2020. Due to COVID-19, President Trump at first extended the census deadline to October, but now that deadline has been shortened by a month to the end of September. This tighter time frame is raising real concerns about an undercount, which would impact a lot of federal funding for the city of Detroit. Victoria Kovari, executive director of the Detroit 2020 Census, talked with One Detroit's Bill Kubota about the challenges of getting more people to participate in the middle of a pandemic.
Southwest Detroit, a Census 2020 crew signs up a shopper who hasn't done the census yet.
We're basically going to where Detroiters are, and that's either at home or at food distribution sites, at grocery stores. So that's our tactic, is just try to go where people are and be as safe as possible and take all the precautions that are necessary to keep people safe.
In Southwest, the census response rate is low. Even with the offer of a $5 grocery store coupon, it can be a tough sell, attributed to some who fear the census could trigger problems based on their immigration status. Mayor Mike Duggan made the census a priority in April last year, kicking off a $3 million campaign to raise the response rate.
In 2010, the lowest response rate of any major city in America was in Detroit.
A response rate of 64%. The lower the rate, the more federal dollars left on the table.
We said this time we're not making any excuses. We're going to start early because of what's at stake.
Online, out and about, the ads for the census seem hard to miss. Victoria Kovari has been in charge of Detroit's efforts since the beginning of last year.
It's up to you, it's up to me, it's up to all of us to make sure we get this right.
A big push last fall, then the pandemic hit.
What's going on over there? You busy these days?
Yeah, well, we're busier than ever because the Census Bureau decided to cut short the census operations 30 days. So now it's supposed to end September 30th, and which means we have about 6-7 weeks to go.
Because of COVID-19, President Trump extended the census-taking deadline, but last week he shortened it. Let's talk geographically. What areas are getting the best responses? Where are the struggles?
Well, in terms of council districts, Districts 1 and Districts 2, which are mostly the northwest side of Detroit, they are having the best response any of the districts. District 1 is the only district, and that would be the northwest part of Detroit, that has exceeded their rate in 2010, which is pretty remarkable. But the lowest areas and the areas that we're finding the biggest challenge in are Districts 5 and 6. So District 5, the central part of the city, we're looking at 30 to 40% response rates. There's two big reasons for that. One is the large number of vacancies in those areas, so has had an impact on the response rates, and the midtown downtown area near Wayne State, all the way from like the river to past Warren. A lot of apartments and people in those buildings have decided to wade the coronavirus out somewhere else. So you can just go downtown and midtown, you'll see how empty it is compared to pre-COVID times.
You know, this was a growth area, midtown, downtown, from 10 years ago. Where look, there'd probably be some population gain there.
Absolutely.
But does it look like we're going to have population loss with this whole thing now?
Not necessarily. I mean, this is, a lot of these vacancies are temporary, but we don't think it'll translate into a permanent loss of residents. And the way the Census Bureau counts population is based on where you were living April 1st. And so for those, especially around Wayne State University, those college students, they're supposed to fill out the census where they would have lived near campus, either on campus or off campus. So the Census Bureau is really trying to correct for this crazy time when they would have been on campus to be counted on April 1, but they weren't. It's a very complicated statistical kind of a calculation that the Census Bureau is going to have to make to correct for those folks that may be temporarily out of their place.
So it's really up to the Census Bureau in Washington.
It's up to the Census Bureau, the career Census Bureau workers, many of whom have worked multiple censuses, and they have much more sophisticated ways of measuring population than they did 10 years ago, for instance. But that's why it's so important that the Census Bureau have enough time to sort of make these kind of corrections. So there's a movement in Washington right now on the part of the House and the Senate to extend that statutory deadline beyond December 31st to April 1st, 2021.
Well, this extension, if it happens, has to be signed by the president, correct?
Correct. That's why it's not likely to happen, even though the Trump administration actually were the first ones that requested an extension to April 1st. They did that in April of this 2020.
According to the Census 2020 website, Detroit again trails major cities in response rates, except for Cleveland. Clock's ticking. Kovari says the targeting of a 70% response rate means Detroit's population loss will be minimal or no loss at all. Well, the goal is 70%, and what, the word now around 50%? Is that right?
Yeah, we're just below 50%, but again, if you correct for vacant numbers of units, we think we're in the upper 60s once you make that correction. We're just urging everyone who has not filled out the census. There's no time like now. We only have a few weeks left where that website, my2020census.gov, will be open. So we're really hoping that we get as much participation from all sectors of Detroit as possible.
Victoria Kovari runs the census in Detroit. Thanks for talking to One Detroit.
Thank you.
Since the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, the divide between police and the community has grown ever wider across the country. Increasing tensions and misperceptions on both sides have led to a deeper conversation about law enforcement and community safety. I talked with Misha Stallworth, Detroit Public Schools board member, and Sherry McRill, president and CEO of Northeast Integrated Health, about strategies to support the police and the public on American Black Journal.
CAPA stands for Community and Police Partnership and Advocacy. And so it is truly a partnership program, primarily with DPD. We've been partnering with them for over 20 years with the officers, as well as our team, which consists of masters prepared, social workers, psychologists. We have police officers on our team. We also have peers who've been through the justice system. And so it's a three-part program. Actually, we do training for all the officers at DPD when they come on board at the academy. And then we do annual updates for them. We also go into the precincts and do training. We provide follow-up counseling and specialized services for officers. As you know, there's a high rate of alcoholism, substance abuse, suicide, depression, all the kinds of issues that the general public have, but really ingrained in terms of the kind of stress that those folks experience. And then we also have our walk along, ride along program where we're partnered with DPD officers on the street, actually responding to public safety issues. And I think the message for about CAPA is that public safety is really a partnership, and it's a partnership not just with law enforcement and behavioral health, but also with the business community in terms of how that impacts them.
What have you seen or experienced since you've been doing this in terms of the difference in outcome for the people who are being responded to by police?
Well, obviously our outcomes are, the first, number one is safety. We want people to come out without having a violent encounter that ends in some kind of danger to residents. And we've seen that for over 20 years. Working in this partnership with DPD side by side, we've been, walking along and riding along and are able to respond to situations and to help diagnose situations so that really at worst case scenario, these become misdemeanor situations and not felonies.
Misha Stallworth, schools, of course, are rethinking policing in important ways as well. Talk about what you guys are doing and how you're taking in this moment and the need to really rethink all of that. I'll start here. There are some people who say police don't belong in schools.
Police don't belong in schools enforcing our code of conduct, right? So the whole thing about disrupting a school to prison pipeline is that you don't treat kids like criminals when they're at school. You address behavior problems from adolescence as if they are behavior problems from adolescence, not as if they are, violent crimes, even when students sometimes can be violent. We know that that is a reality. However, it's, part of healthy youth development to receive an intervention at that point and to learn a new behavior, not to be put in handcuffs and then entered into the criminal justice system. So one of the things that's unique about our school district compared to districts around the country is that the police, the Detroit Public Schools police are actually a department within DPSCD. So it is not the city police. And it's an important distinction because what that means is that we have control over how those officers are trained. We have control over where they are deployed. We have control over what their roles actually are. And we have control over what happens if the police are called by staff for some reason. We still spend too much on police. We've increased our spending on, nurses and counselors and deans and folks who facilitate positive culture. But we're working on looking at how do we think about safety more comprehensively within the district? How do we engage in that conversation with our community and our families? Many folks, we're raised to both be concerned about the police, but also to accept that they are the intervention when something happens. And so there are a lot of folks who do think of having police in schools as the safe route. There are other folks who don't want police in schools. So we see this as an opportunity to start having this conversation as a community so that we can think, again, comprehensively about safety. We can think about safety in an anti-racist way. We can think about safety in a way that addresses the needs of our students from a healthy youth development approach, our staff so that they're in an environment they feel good in, and our families so that they feel welcome in our buildings.
Beginning this week, the Detroit News and Free Press are going to require paid subscriptions for access to some of their digital content. One Detroit contributor, Nolan Finley, who's editorial page editor for the Detroit News, spoke with his paper's editor and publisher, Gary Miles, about the reasons for the paywall and what this move means for the future of newspapers in Detroit.
Gary, the Detroit newspapers this week for the first time began charging their readers for some online content. What does that change mean for readers of the Detroit News?
Well, I think for the most part, it means we'll be setting aside some of our specialized content, some of our most in-depth, some of our most unique stories, just for people digitally who are paying. If people are already a subscriber in print or the e-edition, essentially it's unchanged. They continue to have free access to all of our content. But for those people who have been reading online and not contributing to the cost of news gathering, we're asking them to pay a small amount every month to continue to get the full access to the Detroit News.
We've heard over the years a lot about declining circulation, declining revenue in the newspaper industry. What we don't talk a whole lot about is the demand for news. And during this COVID crisis, during this time of turmoil in our nation, the demand for news has really spiked.
It has, and even then we were humming along at 3 to 4 million unique visitors to our website every month, even before COVID. But now that's taken it up to 6 and 7 million unique visitors. So I think in many ways it has reinforced the need for people to look for reliable, trustworthy information and to go to the sources they trust the most during this crisis. And of course, that's not the only thing that's been going on in this time period. Besides COVID, we've had the Black Lives Matter protests and other significant news. We had the flooding in Midland County, which is where I grew up, from the dams in the Tittabawassee River. So we've had some other significant news events in Michigan that definitely have played a role in the increased usage of DetroitNews.com. I should say that much of our COVID crisis coverage will continue to be free to people.
In other markets that made this change long ago and put their whole sites behind a paywall, what's been the experience? Do they hang on to their readers?
They really are. Our company, Media News Group, has consistently suggested that they have been surprised by the outcome. They've been surprised by the support of readers when they've had to make choices and try and determine whether limiting some content and therefore limiting some advertising availability would actually increase revenue through reader subscriptions. They have found that readers have continued to say, we want to support this news outlet in the major markets where they are.
Whenever I speak to a group, one of the first questions I get from the people in the audience is, will there be a newspaper in 10 years? What's your answer to that question?
Well, I think this is a big challenge both for us and to readership, and that now is the time to support the news organizations that you trust. We have a very loyal readership at the Detroit News. In other words, we examine our statistics many times digitally based on not just how many people come to the site, but how long they stay on the site. And we see that we have a very loyal and interested readership that stays a lot of time on our site when they come, so they're not just reading one thing that they saw on Facebook and bouncing out. We've had a lot of success, and I think those are all good indicators that when people want news, they go to trusted sources. Certainly, there are outstanding bloggers. There's a lot more different journalism in the space right now that people can access, and as far as I'm concerned, the more journalism, the better. At the same time, there aren't many places that cover the Metro Detroit and Michigan region comprehensively like we do, and we try to do. And so I think that the future for journalism is strong, and the step like this, asking our readers to contribute to our digital readers to help contribute to the cost of producing news, will really be a big indicator about how long newspapers do survive, because this is the big transition to digital.
What do you think about local newspapers adopting paywalls? Let us know on Facebook or on Twitter. And finally today, sundown towns. Though protests against police brutality and white supremacy have mostly taken place in the city of Detroit, the suburbs are now beginning to grapple with their own racist history and policies. Historically, sundown towns have been defined as places where African Americans were not permitted to live. One Detroit associate producer, Will Glover, talked with Bridge Detroit's Bryce Huffman about his recent report on how many Detroit suburbs are wrestling with their legacy of being sundown towns that carried out anti-Black policies.
What is a sundown town, and why did you decide to write this article?
Sundown towns are towns where either on paper, in a law, or in housing contracts, Black people basically weren't allowed to live there. They're called sundown towns because oftentimes Black people were allowed to work there, usually in butler or nanny capacities, but they weren't allowed to own homes there. So if they were there after sundown, they would either be escorted out by law enforcement, escorted out by the threat of violence by an angry mob, or actually faced real violence. And I wanted to write about this because a lot of the time when we talk about racism and our country's history with it, we don't talk about how racism looked in the North.
What is the difference between what we're talking about when it comes to sundown towns versus segregation, or, as you referenced, the racism that people were facing down south?
So I think the big difference is the legality, right? So sundown towns didn't all have the same laws and same practices, but what kind of gives them the term sundown town is that somewhere they were explicitly being anti-Black, whether it was in housing policies. For instance, a lot of the Grosse Pointes and a lot of Detroit suburbs had it in housing contracts that you weren't allowed to sell this home to a Black family, even when Black families could afford to buy the house. Or other times there were laws literally saying Black people aren't allowed to be here after dark.
How are some of the remnants of these sundown towns and that segregation still, with us today?
Racial profiling in police. And it's something that people really push back on this idea, but it's actually quite simple. If you live in a suburb that is 90+% white, and you see a group of Black kids driving through it, the police automatically look at them as outsiders. And I think that actually is where a lot of the implicit bias against young Black men particularly comes from when it comes to law enforcement. It's, you're in an area that historically you have never been in. What are you doing here? It automatically brings up suspicion. And instead of, seeing me as someone who's going home after visiting a friend, I'm now someone who's seen as a suspect in some wrongdoing.
One of the things you touch on that is kind of an example of that is the recent billboard outside of Livonia, which said, driving while Black, racial profiling just ahead, welcome to Livonia. So when you talk to law enforcement, what was their reaction to, the notion of sundown towns and that billboard?
The Livonia police did not like the billboard. And I don't think any police officer would. It's putting them in a box of, you don't like Black people, you're suspicious of Black drivers. And what I think the billboard really is trying to do is have us start a conversation about those things, about that very real history and that very real practice of seeing Black drivers as suspicious. So the Livonia police chief actually pushed back against it and says, we never teach that. We don't encourage racial profiling. That's not something that we're trying to do. Yet when you have a whole community of people who feel like well, that's something that's happened to me. That's something that I've experienced. You can't just negate that experience.
How are these suburbs changing their respective histories?
Some cities like Ferndale have really changed their reputation. Ferndale, to many people's surprise when I published the piece, was a sundown town. But now Ferndale is seen as this very progressive, liberal place where everyone is accepted, in large part because their acceptance of the LGBTQ community. And I don't know about you, but when I see a pride flag, I feel a lot safer because I'm like, if they like gay people, there's a chance they don't hate black people. You know, it's not always true,
just a little bit,
it's just a
but
chance.
yeah.
You know, it makes me feel just a little bit more comfortable, you know?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think a lot of these suburbs have really changed their reputation just with the influx of new people coming in.
That's going to do it for us on One Detroit. Thanks for joining. For more, head to our website, onedetroitpbs.org. And be sure to catch a new One Detroit Arts and Culture episode on Monday at 7:30 p.m. For One Detroit, I'm Stephen Henderson. Have a great weekend and take care.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.
Support for this program provided by W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, MASCO Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. MASCO, serving Michigan communities since 1929. The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. NISSAN Foundation. And viewers like you.